The rain lashed against David Carter's weathered pickup truck. It was well past midnight on a late November night in 2025, and David, a 38-year-old widower, felt the ache of a double shift at the construction site in every muscle. All he wanted was to get home to his 9-year-old daughter, Ava, who was likely curled up under a quilt at their neighbor, Mrs. Elena Martinez's house, her soft snores filling the quiet. The dashboard clock blinked 12:52 a.m. His mind drifted to Ava's bright smile. As he rounded a bend, his headlights swept across a lone bus stop, illuminating a figure so small and fragile it nearly blended into the storm. A teenage girl, no more than 17, sat hunched on the metal bench, her thin frame trembling beneath a sodden hoodie that offered no protection from the biting wind. Her pregnant belly, David's breath caught. He'd known that kind of loneliness, growing up in foster homes where kindness was scarce and survival was a daily battle. Without a second thought, he eased the truck to the curb, tires hissing through puddles, and reached for the old wool coat he kept in the back seat. Its familiar weight, a reminder of winters spent working outdoors. Stepping into the deluge rain, soaking his flannel shirt, he approached the shelter slowly, his boots splashing in the shallow pools gathering on the pavement. "Hey, you okay out here?" he called, his voice soft but carrying over the storm's roar, careful not to startle her. The girl, Sophie, lifted her head, her wide hazel eyes glinting with fear and exhaustion, her dark hair plastered to her cheeks. Like wet ink, rain mingled with what might have been tears, and her lips trembled as she whispered, "I'm fine." But the quiver in her voice, and the way her arms wrapped protectively around her belly, told a different story. David held out the coat, its warmth a stark contrast to the icy air. "You're not fine. It's freezing, and you're soaked through. You need to get warm." Sophie's gaze flickered to the coat, then back to David, her body tensing as if ready to flee, despite having nowhere to go. "I can't pay for it," she said, her voice barely audible, raw with distrust honed by months of hardship. "I just want to help. My name's David. I've got a daughter, Ava, a bit younger than you. When did you last eat something?" Sophie's hand tightened on her stomach, her silence heavy with shame. "Yesterday morning, I think," she murmured, her eyes dropping to the cracked concrete. David's chest tightened, a surge of anger at the world mixing with a fierce resolve to act. He'd seen too much suffering to drive past, too many nights spent hungry as a kid to ignore her need. "Look, Sophie," he said, catching her name when she mumbled it. "I can't leave you out here, not in this storm, not in your condition. I've got a house not far from here, warm food, a spare room, no strings, I promise." Sophie's eyes searched his face, her instincts screaming caution after months fending for herself on the streets, dodging offers of help that came with hidden costs. But the wind cut through her thin clothes like a knife, and David's brown eyes held a warmth she hadn't seen since her mother's death. A year ago, a kindness that felt like a lifeline. "I don't know you," she said, her teeth chattering, her voice wavering between fear and desperation. "I know," David said, keeping his distance to give her space, "but I'm just a dad who's seen tough times. I've got a safe place, a hot meal, and a bed you can use. You and your baby need that tonight." Sophie hesitated, her fingers clutching the edge of the bench, the cold seeping deeper into her bones. The storm howled, and her options dwindled to none. Finally, she nodded, a small, reluctant gesture, and David exhaled, relief flooding through him. He helped her stand, her small frame unsteady, as she leaned on him, and guided her to the truck, where he draped the coat over her shoulders and cranked the heater to full blast. As they drove through the rain-swept streets, Sophie sat huddled in the passenger seat, the warmth of the truck seeping into her chilled skin, her hands cradling her belly as if shielding her unborn child from the world's cruelty. David stole glances at her, his heart heavy with questions about her story, but heavier with the certainty that he'd made the right choice. The road ahead was dark, but for the first time in months, Sophie felt a flicker of safety, and David felt a spark of purpose reignite in his grief-worn heart. David's truck rolled into the driveway of his modest Port Haven home. Sophie clutched the oversized wool coat around her, her heart pounding with a mix of gratitude and unease as she stepped out into the storm, following David to the front door. Inside, the warmth of the house enveloped her like a blanket, the faint smell of cedar and fresh bread lingering in the air. Mrs. Elena Martinez met them at the threshold, her gaze softening as it landed on Sophie's drenched figure and swollen belly. "Oh, Mia, you're soaked through," she said. David introduced Sophie quietly, his voice steady but carrying the weight of the moment. "Elena, this is Sophie. She's staying with us tonight." Elena nodded, her years of raising 5 children and fostering countless others giving her an instinct for when questions could wait. She handed Sophie a thick towel and guided her to the living room, where a worn but cozy couch sat under a quilted throat. "Dry off, sweetheart, and I'll heat up some tortilla soup," Elena said, already moving toward the kitchen. Sophie hesitated, her hands trembling as she toweled her hair, the warmth of the house clashing with the cold knot of distrust in her chest. David noticed her unease and knelt by the couch, keeping his distance. "You're safe here," he said, his voice low and reassuring. "Elena's been like family since my wife passed. She's got a heart bigger than this town." Sophie nodded, her throat tight, unable to voice the gratitude that flickered beneath her fear. Upstairs, David showed her to the guest room, a small space with a neatly made bed, a wooden dresser, and a window overlooking a windswept backyard where a tire swing swayed in the storm. "This is yours for tonight," he said, setting a pair of his old sweatpants and a flannel shirt on the bed. Bathrooms across the hall, towels in the closet. Sophie's eyes stung as she took in the simple kindness of a clean bed, a stark contrast to the damp shelters and park benches she'd called home for months. Downstairs, as Elena ladled steaming soup into a bowl, the front door creaked open and Ava bounded in, her curly auburn hair bouncing as she shook off her raincoat. "Dad, it's like a hurricane out there," she chirped, then froze, her green eyes locking onto Sophie, who stood awkwardly by the kitchen doorway. "Hi, I'm Ava," she said, her smile bright and unguarded. "Are you staying with us?" Sophie glanced at David, unsure how to respond, but his nod encouraged her. "I'm Sophie," she said softly. "Just for tonight." Ava tilted her head, her gaze dropping to Sophie's belly. "Is there a baby in there?" she asked, her curiosity innocent but piercing. Sophie's hand moved protectively to her stomach, a small smile breaking through. "Yeah, there is." Ava's face lit up. "That's so cool. Can I help name it?" David chuckled, ruffling Ava's hair. "Let's let Sophie eat first, kiddo." Over dinner, the kitchen table became a haven of warmth, the clink of spoons against bowls, mingling with Ava's chatter about her day at school. Sophie sipped the soup, its rich flavors of tomato and cumin warming her from the inside, and for the first time in weeks, her body relaxed. Elena watched her with quiet compassion, slipping a plate of warm cornbread her way. "Eat up, Mia. You're feeding too now." Sophie's cheeks flushed, but she nodded, grateful for the care that felt both foreign and familiar. After dinner, David insisted on taking Sophie to the community health clinic first thing in the morning. "You need to get checked out. Make sure you and the baby are okay," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Sophie's eyes widened, panic flaring. "I don't have insurance. I can't pay for a doctor." David shook his head. "The clinic's free for those who need it. We'll figure it out." That night, Sophie lay in the guest room, the soft hum of the heater and the distant patter of rain lulling her into a fragile sense of safety. She thought of her mother, who had died in a car crash a year ago, leaving her with a stepfather whose cruelty had driven her to the streets. The memory of his harsh words, "You're no daughter of mine," stung, but the warmth of David's home dulled the pain. Downstairs, David sat with Elena, explaining Sophie's situation in hushed tones. "She's just a kid, Elena," he said, his voice heavy, pregnant, alone, no family. "I couldn't leave her out there." Elena reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "You did the right thing, David. She's scared, but she's strong. You can see it in her eyes." David nodded, his thoughts drifting to Sarah, who had always stopped to help strays human or animal, her compassion a light he'd tried to carry on for Ava. As Sophie drifted to sleep, the weight of her loneliness lifted slightly, replaced by a tentative hope. Ava's laughter, Elena's warmth, and David's quiet resolve had cracked open a door she'd thought was forever closed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, she was safe, and that was enough. Morning light filtered through the guest room's curtains, casting a soft glow across Sophie's face as she woke to the distant clatter of dishes and the smell of brewing coffee. For a moment, she lay still, the unfamiliar comfort of a real bed anchoring her to a reality that felt like a dream. The events of the previous night, David's rescue, Elena's kindness, Ava's bright curiosities whirled in her mind, stirring a cautious hope she hadn't dared to feel in months. She dressed in the borrowed flannel and sweatpants, her fingers brushing her swollen belly as she steeled herself to face the day. Downstairs, Ava was already at the kitchen table, coloring a picture of a lighthouse while David flipped pancakes on a griddle. "Morning, Sophie," Ava chirped, waving a crayon. "I made you a drawing for your baby." The gesture, so small yet so earnest, tugged at Sophie's heart, and she managed a shy smile as she took the paper, its bold colors a stark contrast to the gray world she'd known. David slid a plate of pancakes toward her, his expression warm, but careful. "Sleep, okay?" he asked. Sophie nodded, her throat tight with gratitude she couldn't yet voice. After breakfast, David drove her to the Port Haven Community Health Clinic, a squat brick building with a mural of seagulls on its side. Inside, Dr. Rachel Kim, a nonsense doctor with a gentle smile, examined Sophie with practiced care. "You're about 32 weeks along," Dr. Kim said, her eyes scanning the ultrasound screen. "The baby's heartbeat is strong, but you're underweight and dehydrated. Have you been eating regularly?" Sophie's cheeks burned as she shook her head, the weight of her months on the streets pressing down. "We'll get you on prenatal vitamins and a nutrition plan," Dr. Kim continued, her tone free of judgment. "You're doing the best you can, and that's what matters." David, waiting in the hallway, caught Sophie's eye as she emerged, her expression a mix of relief and vulnerability. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yeah," she said softly. "The baby's healthy." His smile was like sunlight breaking through clouds, and for the first time, Sophie felt a flicker of pride in her resilience. Back at the house, Ava was eager to show Sophie her collection of seashells, each one carefully labeled with its beach of origin. The girls' chatter filled the quiet, and Sophie found herself relaxing, drawn into Ava's world of small wonders. But as the day wore on, Sophie's guard began to crack, and over a quiet lunch of sandwiches, she started to share her story. "My mum died last year," she said, her voice low, her eyes fixed on the table. "Car accident. After that, it was just me and my stepdad Greg. But he wasn't kind. When I told him I was pregnant, he called me a disgrace and threw me out." David's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent, letting her speak. "My boyfriend, Ethan, he didn't want anything to do with it either. Said it wasn't his. Told everyone. I was lying." Her voice broke, and Ava reached out, her small hand resting on Sophie's. "That's not fair," Ava said, her voice fierce for a minute. Sophie managed a weak smile, touched by the girl's empathy. Later that afternoon, David suggested they visit the community center, where a free GED program was starting. "You're smart, Sophie," he said as they walked through the center's bustling halls, filled with flyers for support groups and job fairs. "You could finish high school, maybe even look at college someday." Sophie's stomach twisted with doubt. "I dropped out when everything fell apart. I don't know if I can go back." David's gaze was steady. "You've survived worse than a few tests. You've got this." The words, simple but sincere, planted a seed of possibility. That evening, as Sophie helped Ava with her math homework, the doorbell rang, shattering the fragile calm. Alina answered, and Sophie froze at the sound of a familiar voice. It was her Aunt Clara, her mother's older sister, who had drifted out of her life after the funeral. Clara stood in the doorway, her face lined with regret, her eyes searching for Sophie. "I heard you were in town," Clara said, her voice trembling. "I've been looking for you." Sophie's heart raced, old wounds reopening. "Why now?" she asked, her tone sharp. Clara's shoulders sagged. "I was wrong to stay away. I was grieving, but that's no excuse. I want to make it right." Sophie's instinct was to shut her out. the pain of abandonment still raw, but David's quiet presence beside her reminded her of his own stories of foster care, of chances taken and chances lost. "I need time," Sophie said finally, her voice firm but not cruel. Clara nodded, tears in her eyes, and left her number, promising to wait. That night, as Sophie lay in bed, the baby kicking softly, she wrestled with Clara's words and David's encouragement. The idea of school, of a future, felt like a distant shore, but the kindness surrounding her Ava's drawing, Elena's soup, David's belief, made it seem less impossible. She wasn't ready to forgive Clara, but the thought of rebuilding, of giving her baby a life she'd never had, sparked a quiet determination. David, sitting in his own room, thought of Sarah, who would have loved Sophie's strength, and felt a stirring of purpose, a sense that helping Sophie was mending something broken in himself. The days following Sophie's encounter with Clara settled into a fragile rhythm at David's Port Haven home, where the salty temps of the nearby ocean mingled with the warmth of routine. Sophie, now a fixture in the household, woke each morning to Ava's excited chatter and Elena's bustling presence, her heart slowly thawing under their care. She attended GED classes at the community center, her mind sharp despite the fog of pregnancy fatigue, and found herself drawn to the possibility of a future beyond survival. David, ever steady, drove her to weekly clinic visits, where Dr. Kim monitored her progress with a reassuring smile. Noting the baby's steady growth and Sophie's improving health, Ava, meanwhile, had taken to leaving small gifts for Sophie. Braided friendship bracelet, a pressed flower from the backyard, each one a quiet reminder that she was no longer alone. But late one night, as a soft drizzle pattered against the windows, Sophie woke to a sharp, twisting pain in her lower abdomen, a sensation unlike the gentle kicks she'd grown used to. Her breath hitched, fear clawing at her as she realized the baby was coming early. "David," she called, her voice tight with panic, clutching the edge of the bed as another contraction gripped her. Within moments, David was at her door, his hair disheveled but his eyes alert, already grabbing the hospital bag they'd packed weeks ago. "It's going to be okay," he said, his calm voice anchoring her as he helped her down the stairs. Elena, roused by the commotion, promised to stay with Ava, who sleepily waved from the couch, whispering, "Tell the baby I said hi." The drive to Port Haven General was a blur, the rain-slicked roads reflecting the hospital's neon sign as David gripped Sophie's hand through each contraction, his steady presence a lifeline. At the hospital, Dr. Kim met them in the labor ward, her calm efficiency cutting through Sophie's fear. "You're in early labor," she said, checking the monitors. "The baby's strong. Sophie, you've got this." Hours passed in a haze of pain and encouragement, David never leaving her side, his hand a constant in hers as he murmured words of strength. "You're tougher than anyone I know," he said, his voice breaking slightly as he watched her endure. Sophie, sweat-soaked and trembling, clung to his words, her fear tempered by the trust she'd built in him. As the contractions intensified, she found herself whispering, "I want my aunt here." David nodded, stepping into the hall to call Clara, who arrived within the hour, her face pale with worry but her eyes brimming with love. "I'm here, Sophie," Clara said, taking her other hand, her voice thick with regret and hope. Sophie, too exhausted to hold on to old grudges, squeezed her aunt's hand, a silent acknowledgement of her presence. At 4:12 a.m., after a final wrenching push, Sophie's son was born a small, perfect boy with a shock of dark hair and a cry that filled the room with life. Dr. Kim placed him on Sophie's chest, his tiny warmth igniting a love so fierce it drowned out the pain. "Noah," Sophie whispered, naming him after the biblical survivor, a nod to the storms they'd both weathered. Clara wept quietly, brushing a finger across Noah's cheek, while David stepped back, his eyes glistening as he gave them space. "He's beautiful," he said softly, his voice catching. Sophie looked up, her heart full, and beckoned him closer. "Come meet him," she said, her smile fragile but radiant. David approached, his rough hands gentle as he touched Noah's tiny fist, a wave of protectiveness washing over him. Back at the house, Sophie and Noah settled into the guest room, now adorned with a borrowed crib from Elena's attic. Ava was smitten, hovering over Noah with wide-eyed wonder, insisting on helping with his blankets and singing him lullabies she made up on the spot. "He's like a little starfish," she said, giggling as Noah's fingers curled around hers. Sophie, still sore and exhausted, marveled at the family forming around her, their care stitching together the frayed edges of her heart. Clara visited daily, bringing homemade casseroles and stories of Sophie's mother, her apologies woven into every gesture. "I should have been there," she said one evening, folding Noah's onesies, "but I'm here now, if you'll let me." Sophie nodded, her forgiveness tentative but growing, like a seedling breaking through soil. David, meanwhile, found himself watching Sophie with new eyes, her strength in motherhood mirroring the resilience he'd admired from that first rainy night. He took on extra shifts to cover baby supplies, brushing off Sophie's protests with a grin. "Your family now," he said, the words carrying a weight neither fully acknowledged. As Sophie rocked Noah to sleep one night, his soft breaths steady against her chest, she felt the stirrings of a future she hadn't dared imagine, one where she could be more than a survivor, where Noah could grow up surrounded by love. The road ahead was uncertain, but with David, Ava, Elena, and now Clara in her corner, Sophie felt ready to face it, one step at a time. A year had passed since Noah's birth, and the Port Haven house hummed with the chaotic joy of a new normal, its walls echoing with Noah's babbling laughter and Ava's endless questions about the world. Sophie, now 18, had transformed the guest room into a cozy nook for herself and Noah, the crib nestled beside a desk where she studied late into the night for her GED. The community center had become her second home, its GED program a lifeline to a future she was beginning to believe in. David, ever the quiet anchor, had adjusted his work schedule to help with Noah, often scooping the boy into his arms after a long day at the construction site, his rough hands gentle as he bounced him to sleep. Ava, now 10, had declared herself Noah's official big sister, crafting colorful mobiles to hang above his crib and reading him picture books with exaggerated voices that sent him into fits of giggles. Elena, with her boundless energy, kept the household fed with her signature enchiladas and wisdom, her presence a steady reminder that family could be built from love, not just blood. Sophie's progress was remarkable. She had aced her exams, her determination fueled by Noah's wide, trusting eyes and the support surrounding her. She'd enrolled in a nursing program at the local community college, her dream of helping others taking shape with every late-night study session. Clara, too, had become a constant, her visits evolving from tentative to essential. The scars of their past estrangement lingered, but Sophie's forgiveness grew stronger with each shared moment, each story of her mother that Clara shared to keep her memory alive. One crisp autumn afternoon, as golden leaves swirled in the backyard, the family gathered to celebrate Noah's first birthday, a milestone that felt like a triumph. The kitchen table was laden with a homemade cake, and balloons bobbed against the ceiling, tied with ribbons by Elena. Sophie held Noah on her hip, his tiny hands grabbing at her hair as she laughed, her heart swelling with a joy she'd never thought possible. David, watching from the doorway, felt a warmth he hadn't known since Sarah's death, a sense that this makeshift family had filled a void he'd carried for years. As Noah smeared cake across his face, Ava squealed with delight, and Clara snapped photos. David slipped outside to the backyard, where a small wooden bench sat under a maple tree. He'd built it months ago, a quiet project to honor Sarah's love of quiet moments outdoors. But today it held a new purpose. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small velvet box, his fingers tracing its edges as he rehearsed the words he'd been turning over in his mind for weeks. When Sophie joined him, Noah now napping in Clara's arms inside, she sensed the shift in his demeanor, her brow furrowing with curiosity. "Everything okay?" she asked, sitting beside him, the cool breeze carrying the scent of salt from the nearby ocean. David took a deep breath, his heart pounding with a mix of nerves and certainty. "Sophie, a year ago, I saw a scared kid at a bus stop, and I thought I was just offering a night's shelter," he began, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "But you've given me so much more. You've brought life back into this house, shown Ava what strength looks like, and made me believe in family again." He opened the box, revealing a simple silver ring with a small sapphire, its blue catching the fading sunlight. "I want to be your partner, not just in this house, but in life. I want to raise Noah and Ava with you, to be there for every step, every dream. Sophie, will you marry me? Will you let me be Noah's dad and Ava's too, in every way that matters?" Sophie's breath caught, tears welling, as she looked from the ring to David's eyes, seeing the same kindness that had saved her that rainy night. Her life before, cold, hungry, alone, felt like a distant shadow, replaced by the warmth of this moment. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking as she leaned into him, her tears falling freely. "Yes, David, I want all of that with you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and they sat there, wrapped in the quiet of the evening, the laughter from inside spilling out like a promise. Ava, peeking through the window, let out a whoop, rushing out to hug them both, her excitement infectious. "Does this mean you're my mum now?" she asked, her eyes wide with hope. Sophie pulled her close, her heart full. "If you want me to be, I'd love that." Clara, watching from the doorway with Noah in her arms, wiped her own tears, grateful for the second chance she'd been given to be part of this family. The wedding was planned for spring, a small affair in the backyard with Elena's cooking and Ava's handmade decorations. Sophie, balancing college and motherhood, began volunteering at the community center, helping other young mothers navigate their own struggles, her empathy a beacon for those as lost as she'd once been. David, watching her grow into her strength, felt a pride that rivaled his love, knowing they were building something lasting, something true. 5 years had woven a tapestry of change in Port Haven, where the salty breeze still carried the promise of new beginnings. Sophie, now 23, stood at the heart of Noah's Haven, the non-profit she'd founded to support young mothers in crisis. Her nursing degree, earned through sleepless nights and unwavering determination, hung proudly on the wall, a testament to the future she'd once thought impossible. The spring wedding to David had blossomed into a life of shared dreams, their home now filled with the laughter of Noah, a spirited 5-year-old with his mother's hazel eyes, and their 2-year-old daughter, Lily, whose giggles echoed through the house like a melody. Ava, now 14 and towering over Sophie with a teenager's lanky grace, had become Noah's fierce protector and Lily's devoted storyteller, weaving tales of mermaids and lighthouses under the backyard maple tree. David, still the family's quiet anchor, had taken a foreman role at the construction site, his steady hands now building not just houses but a legacy of love. Clara, fully woven into their lives, volunteered at Noah's Haven, her warmth and regret-fueled dedication helping mend the rift with Sophie through years of consistent presence. On a crisp October evening, Sophie stood before a small crowd at a fundraiser for Noah's Haven. 5 years ago, I was 17, pregnant, and alone. Sitting at a bus stop in the rain, she began, her eyes sweeping over the faces of donors, volunteers, and young mothers clutching their own babies. "I thought my story was over, that I'd never be more than my mistakes. But one man's kindness, David's kindness, showed me that hope can start with a single act." The room was silent, save for the soft coos of a baby in the back, as Sophie spoke of her journey from survival to purpose, her words igniting nods and tears among the listeners. In the audience, David held Lily on his lap, his heart swelling with pride, while Ava, sitting beside him, whispered to Noah about how Mama se ha superado. After the speech, a young girl approached Sophie, her hands nervously twisting the hem of her jacket. "Miss Sophie, I'm Mia," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, her rounded belly visible beneath her oversized sweater. "My mum kicked me out, and I don't know where to go." Sophie's heart ached, seeing her younger self in Mia's frightened eyes, the same desperation she'd carried that rainy night. She knelt slightly, her smile warm and unwavering. "Mia, you're not alone anymore. We're going to figure this out together." Guiding Mia to a quiet corner, Sophie helped her fill out paperwork for temporary housing at Noah's Haven, her calm efficiency a balm to the girl's panic. Clara joined them, offering Mia a cup of hot cocoa and a story of her own struggles, her presence a quiet promise of support. As they worked, Sophie felt the weight of her own journey, the ripple effect of David's decision to stop that night, now touching lives she'd never imagined. Later, driving home with Noah and Lily asleep in the back seat, Sophie glanced at Ava, who was sketching in a notebook, her pencil tracing the outline of a lighthouse. "Mom, do you ever think about that night at the bus stop?" Ava asked, her voice thoughtful. Sophie smiled, her eyes on the road, the familiar streets of Port Haven glowing under streetlights. "All the time," she said. "It's the night everything changed, not just for me, but for all of us." Ava nodded, her sketch taking shape. "I think Dad knew he was saving more than just you that night." Sophie's throat tightened, the truth of Ava's words settling deep. At home, David was in the yard with 12-year-old Noah, teaching him to toss a baseball under the fading light, their laughter mingling with Lily's squeals as she chased fireflies. Clara, visiting for dinner, was setting the table with Elite, their chatter about a new recipe filling the kitchen. Sophie paused at the threshold, taking in the scene. Her family, built from broken pieces into something whole. She thought of Mia, of the dozens of young mothers Noah's Haven had helped, each one a testament to the power of compassion. Joining David in the yard, she slipped her hand into his, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice soft. The baseball game paused as Noah ran to join Lily. "How one moment can change everything," Sophie said, leaning against him. "You saw me when I was invisible, and now I get to do that for others." David kissed her forehead, his eyes reflecting the same love that had sparked that rainy night. "You saved me too, you know," he said. "This family, this life, it's more than I ever dreamed." As the stars emerged above Port Haven, Sophie looked at her children, her husband, her aunt, and felt the weight of gratitude. The cycle of kindness that began at a bus stop had grown into a legacy, one she carried forward with every young mother she helped, every story she shared. It was a reminder that sometimes the smallest act of care could ripple outward, changing the world one heart at a time.